Okay, good evening. I just got the thumbs up from Mr. K that we are prepared to start here. First off, my name is Matthew Sheehan. I'm the superintendent of Sterling Regional High School District, and I'd like to welcome you to our Rowan University feasibility study. On behalf of the Board of Education, this is something that we're really excited about. The origins took place in 21-22 with our strategic plan session. However, the discussion about school regionalization has taken place for over 60 years at Sterling High School. Also, on behalf of the board, I'd like to thank the Stratford, Summerdale, Magnolia, Laurel Springs, and Hynella members who attended our meetings and for your partnership and participation in this feasibility study. Just to go back a little bit, when we met as a strategic plan in 2021, school regionalization was the priority, the number one item that was selected from our attendees. We had 1,500 surveys. We had 60 members of the community served on our strategic plan committee. And when we set a goal, we said within 3 years, we're going to present a feasibility study to the public. And that brings us to tonight. All right, so before I introduce our group from Rowan, I just wanted to also mention the Sterling administration and their participation in this involvement, the Sterling staff, many of whom are here right now, and a special thank you to many of the members in attendance who participated in the strategic planning. Without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Scott Oswald from the Rowan University group.
All right, good evening, everybody. I'm here, excuse me, I'm here tonight representing the Rowan School Regionalization Institute. Mark Magyar next to me is one of the directors of the Regionalization Institute, and our sole purpose is really to do these types of feasibility studies. We have done several in the South Jersey area. I know my colleagues up north are working on several up in the northern part of the state. Tonight we're obviously going to focus on the school regionalization study for Sterling Regional. So I want to jump in. I'm going to walk you through these slides. I will talk you through everything that's on the slides, but I will also add in some backstory here as we go as well. So Sterling was awarded by the state of New Jersey a LEAP grant to complete this study. A LEAP grant is LEAP stands for Local Efficiency Achievement Program. And again, it was established, a LEAP grant in particular was established not only to help and assist school districts, but also municipalities in investigating how they can become more efficient, how they can share services if that's the answer, and in the case of schools, it's either shared services or consolidation regionalization. So this is the purpose of the LEAP grant. I'll give you a second to read through that. And I know we'll send this to Mr. Sheehan after this, after the session tonight, and he can post it online if you want to go back and look at it. These are the purposes behind the study that we're going to present tonight. Before we get going into some of the Sterling specifics, I just want to share with you kind of the role of the Rowan School Regionalization Institute in this study and all of the studies we work on. We are contracted by the lead school district. In any study, there is a lead district, right? In this case, it was Sterling Regional. To complete the required state-funded study, important note here, local taxes didn't pay for a penny of this. This is 100% funded at the state level. Again, since this study is publicly funded, it's not your local tax money, but it is still our tax money, you and mine. It must be released to the taxpayers. It must be released to the public. We can't do the study and bury it anywhere, right? We have to go through this process, which we think is fair to everybody involved, and we think it's especially fair to the taxpayers of all the communities. Once we do the study, we had a steering committee that met. We presented the draft results. When we do these types of study, I don't live too far from here, so I know a little bit about Sterling. I was a superintendent in another Colonial Conference school district, so I have a little bit of background. But sometimes we go into districts around which we know nothing, right? We know very little. So we want to make sure that we put together this steering committee that shares with us some of the local context. And that's what we use the steering committee for. Share with us, reading through the draft of the results that we come up with and the study that we do, as well as sharing any local context. Once we do that, we make any adjustments based upon that local context information, and then we present a final document for consideration by the districts, by the boards of education. The final part that we're doing this evening for our part is presenting the findings and recommendation at a meeting such as this tonight. So there'll be a lot of findings and recommendations in here. I don't think any of them are going to be particularly surprising to anybody, but I'll explain them as we go through. The Rowan School Regionalization Institute does not and cannot mandate regionalization. I've heard that. We don't come in and say you must regionalize. We don't work for the state. We don't have any power to do that, and we wouldn't want to do that. That means that if regionalization does become reality, it's because you as the taxpayers, as the communities, and as the voters made it reality, right? We don't get to say that. We wouldn't say that. And we cannot force a vote in all or any communities, right? So at this point, when we're done with this presentation tonight, and we will be around to provide support and help if the districts so choose, but at the same time, this is really now we turn it over to the community and you decide what you believe to be best for your communities. The purpose of the study, first of all, I do want to thank, Matt mentioned this, but I have to thank all of the administrators from all of the districts listed up there. This study doing one of these studies involves the collection of ridiculous amounts of data. And they were very receptive to providing us with that data, did so quickly, really allowed us to get this study going and off the ground. So all of those, at some point, the districts have expressed an interest in examining the feasibility of reorganizing their school districts or expanding shared services to become more efficient. Here are the two options. Consolidation, I'm going to talk about this because this is usually where this usually gets a little confusing for folks. Consolidation, regionalization, kind of mean the same thing. Consolidating the districts, two things to understand. In a regional school district, you can have two different types of relationships. One of those relationships makes you a constituent district. That means that you are a member, you have members on the Board of Education of the regional district, you vote on the thing, you vote for Board of Education members in the regional district, right? So you are a constituent district. You basically own the district, right? This is yours. In this area, Magnolia, Summerdale, and Stratford are the three constituent districts, right? The other two districts, Laurel Springs and Hynella, and Hynella is what we call a non-operating district. Laurel Springs and Hynella are what we call send-receives or tuition send-receive districts. When they send students here to Sterling, they pay tuition for them. Very different, right? They don't receive, if you live in one of those first three communities, you get a tax bill that has two school districts listed, right? So you're going to get a tax bill for your local district, you're going to get a bill that includes your local district and your regional district. If you live in one of the other communities, Laurel Springs or Hynella, you get a bill that has one school district listed. That has nothing to do with how much it's for, right? Can be more than what the other communities pay, but you have one school district listed. They take some of that money, and for the students they send here to Sterling, they send tuition, right? So they pay tuition, just like you were sending your student somewhere, your child somewhere, and you were paying tuition. So those are the two different arrangements that we have. So consolidating the limited purpose, Sterling is called a limited purpose regional because it only serves students in grades 9 through 12. Limited purpose regional with its current constituent districts is one of the options. So the Magnolia, Summerdale, and Stratford, they're constituent districts. If this idea, this concept was to go to a vote, those are the three communities that would vote. Hynella and Laurel Springs, get to that in a second, they do not vote. They would not have a right to vote on whether Sterling Regional becomes a larger or all-purpose regional district serving pre-K to 12, right? Because they are not constituent districts right now. What Laurel Springs and Hynella can do is part of the vote here in the constituent Sterling districts, part of the vote is going to say, do you want to regionalize? The second part's going to say, if we do regionalize, do we want to invite Laurel Springs and Hynella into the region? They would then become constituent districts, right? You have to invite them in because they're not in already, right? They send their students here, they're in a send-receive relationship. Laurel Springs and Hynella's vote would be, if Sterling, at those districts, offer us the opportunity to come in, do we want to go in? So there would be kind of two votes on that day, right? The constituent districts would say, do we want to allow them to come in as a constituent districts? The send-receive districts would say, do we want to do that? Do we actually want to go in? All right. So the options, that usually confuses people. I'm not sure I clear it up at all, but that's it. Allowing Laurel Springs or Hynella, right, once we do, if you moved ahead with this regionalization idea, allowing Laurel Springs and Hynella to choose to join the all-purpose regional, or you would modify the current sending and receiving agreements to Hynella grades PK to 12 and to Laurel Springs 7 to 12. So if the regional was to form and Laurel Springs or Hynella said, thanks, but no thanks, we're going to stay on our own, They would still send their kids here. They would just stay in that send-receive relationships. Okay, so they wouldn't become part of the constituent. The other thing we took a look at during the study, excuse me, is shared services. How can you share services? I'll talk about this in a second. How can you further share some of the services that you offer across all these districts to better align your educational programs? And really the goal of this, I know I live in New Jersey, I pay New Jersey taxes, I get it. But our goal, where we focus most of our attention, is on what is this going to do to benefit students, right? Is this a good move for students? Is this not a good move for students? So we take a look at those. We'll do a whole tax thing. We do that. But my part of this study, where I really focus on, in my areas, are how do we benefit the students by examining either consolidation or shared services. All right. Next two slides are going to be a couple of the challenges that we routinely hear about when we talk about consolidation or regionalization. Well, the first one is a perceived loss of local control. When you have a small little K-6 or K-8 district, people feel like they have more control over that level, the schooling, the education at that level. To address that, in the law that surrounds school regionalization, if you join the constituent district, if you join as a constituent district to Sterling Regional, that you will have seats on the Board of Education, at least one seat on every community, no matter how small it is, will have a seat on the Board of Education. Right now, not every community has a seat on the Board of Education at the regional. Financial concerns, there is flexibility, and I'll talk about this in a bit, but there's flexibility in terms of how the community is taxed. There are really three ways that you can apportion taxes. One, based totally on equalized value. That means how much are the homes in your community, what's the value of the properties in your community worth? We don't pay any attention to how many students you're sending, it's just what's your community worth, what's the value. The second is, we don't pay any attention to the value of your community, we just want to know how many kids you're sending. The third is a mix, right? We can play with percentages, and we can land on a percentage, and in this case we land on a percentage where tax-wise, every community wins, right? Nobody sees a tax increase. Doesn't mean the tax decreases are going to be huge, nobody's saving millions, but there is a mix where we can show that everybody saves a little bit of money. So that addresses financial concerns. School closures, job security elements are built into the legislation. No teachers are losing jobs. No teachers are losing jobs. No teacher has a larger risk of losing a job if this were to happen than they would today if you get bad budget news, right? Which can happen at any school year. Anybody that's worked in schools knows that's a possibility. In terms of school closures, which is usually the biggest fear, we have done a number of studies now. We've completed a number of studies and done these presentations. We have never once recommended a school closure, right? Students are sitting in school. Now, I will say we haven't done a school of 7 kids, right? Where there's a whole school open for 7 students. But most of the time in all the districts we've looked at, or all the time in the districts we've looked at, we have not recommended a school closure, and there are no school closures recommended in this study either. Logistical, legal issues, the state of New Jersey, if the district and the region decides that they want to move ahead with school consolidation, there are funding opportunities from the state of New Jersey to help work through a lot of those logistics, right? There's going to be questions that come up. There are going to be questions for which there aren't always easy answers, right? The state of New Jersey will provide, has the option of providing, or you have the option of applying for implementation grants through the state that will allow you to get those questions answered. Again, does not impact your local taxes. Obviously that money's coming from somewhere, but it is not your local taxes. So people talk a lot about shared services. I was a superintendent in a district. I then became a superintendent of 2 school districts, right? That was a shared service. Here are some of the challenges. Shared services have lots of great. You can save some money, you can consolidate things, there are a lot of good parts to it. Here are some of the challenges to shared services. Shared services are often not baked into the culture of a school district, which means if I decide that I'm going to share somebody with this gentleman right here this year because it works for both of us, great. Next year, my enrollment goes up, I need that Spanish teacher an extra period, I can't share her with you anymore, right? I'm taking her back because she's my employee, you're on your own. That make sense? Right? So that's one of the challenges, right? Because it would be nice to think that everybody's just going to hug each other and say, we'll work through this. Reality is, if I'm the superintendent in this school district, I'm taking care of this school district first. Right? If I am the superintendent of a regional school district, guess what? It's all mine. I got to take care of all of it. Staff members who participate in shared services, and I can tell you this, talk to this from firsthand experience, being shared among multiple school districts while can bring savings also leads to immense amounts of burnout, right? I am going to that district on Monday night for their board meeting. I'm going to this district on Tuesday night for their board meeting. Thursday night, another district has a board meeting. I've got 3 different bosses. I got 3 different boards of education to deal with. They don't always agree on everything, right? So I have to answer to all these people. If I'm an employee who has to do all of that, and the job opens up next door in a nice little K-12 where I can answer to one person, where am I going, right? So that's one of the challenges. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. It just means you should be aware of that. Because shared services don't reduce the number of school districts, there are lots of things that happen in schools that are behind the scenes that unless you work in a school, you may not even be aware exist. There are so many reports. There's so many things that have to be uploaded. There are budgets that need to be done. We are in the middle of budget season right now. There are professional development plans and new teacher orientation plans and all those types of things that have to be done. If you have 5 school districts in this region, you're doing 5 of those plans over and over and over again, right? Every one of those things has to be done 5 different times. You add into the regional, and you got 6 different districts, right? So again, it's just inefficient. That's not efficient. Doesn't mean it can't be done. It's just not really efficient. Some of the assumptions that we use in the study, right? The enrollment, the aid, the taxes, all those numbers that we're going to look at in a minute represent a snapshot in time. We take a look and we say, this is the data that we're going to work on. As we're working through this study, these studies can take 6 months. As we're working through the studies, those are the numbers we use. So whatever snapshot date is usually in a school district, October 15th is a very special day. It is the day we take a snapshot of all of our students. This is the number of students we get credit for. If 10 more kids move in on October 16th, we don't get credit for them. If 10 kids move out or move in on October 14th, we do get credit for them because they're here on the 15th. All right? So that's the snapshot that we use. Even the very next day after we take that snapshot, any student who leaves, a student who comes in that has some really special learning challenges, all of those things can change the complexity of a school district. We do not consider those things because we're working off of our snapshot. It's the only way to keep the data consistent. Projections that we use are just that. They are projections. The state of New Jersey changes its formula for state aid and how much school districts get every year. If you don't believe me, ask any school member, any member of a school board that you know. They change those things every single year. We have an amazingly talented financial person who works on this. He does his absolute best to model the state formula. I will tell you, I've done a lot of this work. He pretty much is the person in this state, who has pegged the state funding formula, right? He's built a model and it works just about every single time, right? So if you go to the state of New Jersey and say, show me your funding formula, you know what they tell you? Nope, it's our secret. He somehow figured to model it. So he's got it pretty close. Brian is usually here with us during these presentations. He unfortunately had a medical emergency today, so he's not here. But I will go through his numbers and explain them to you as best I can. Projections are just projections. It does not mean if we say in our study that next year Sterling High School is going to have 792 students, that there's guaranteed going to have 792 students. These are the sections of the study. One of the things we kind of hear rumblings of it is that it's kind of a cookie cutter. This is just a template. In some senses, it is a template. These are the mandated sections of the study. You will see all of these in this presentation. You will see all of these if you read the 160 whatever page study. First thing we do is look at governance and law. We examine what happens if all these districts come together. What is the board going to look like? How many representatives is Heinella going to have? All those types of questions you will find in the study. We also look at, which in the state of New Jersey is one of the first things that the Department of Education will look at, is regionalizing, or this process of regionalizing the school district, is it going to create additional segregation issues? If that happens, the study's not going anywhere, guaranteed, right? In this case, it's all the same kids. It's all the same students we're talking about. You're not inviting in another district, okay? So there are none of those issues, but that's the number one thing we check. That's the very first thing we check for. So the demographics piece looks at the buildings, looks at the number of people, number of students in each district today, what we project it's going to be moving forward, based upon a widely accepted way of doing school projections. It's pretty much the way, it's the method everybody uses. So we look at that moving forward, we look at enrollment histories, and we project out how many kids we believe are going to be in the districts moving ahead. When then again, we also look at that racial, the impact of the racial and other demographic impact of any kind of regionalization. None of those are issues in the study, but we do look at that. Education and program component and looks at a lot. Not only what's happening in the classroom, what's happening outside the classroom, what do your test scores look like, what about special programs, what do you do for your gifted kids, what do you do for your students who might have some special needs, how about if you have students who come to the country and don't speak English. So we look at all of those things in the education and program section. And then finally, the last section in the study is the finance and operations. And tonight, we'll look at all four of these sections, a summary of all four of these sections. But we explore things like state aid, local tax levies. I know that Mr. Sheehan sent out some information, sent out a link, I believe, to many people, for people that are affiliated with the school district, to list your questions. And we got some good questions, so I'm going to address those questions tonight as well. So we have those questions and we have answers to those questions that we can present to you tonight. The governance and law section, the top part is just where the authority comes from to actually do a study and regionalize. That middle part, if you move ahead with a vote, for the vote to be considered successful, a lot of words in here. The voting proposal has to be submitted to the voters of each of the constituent districts of the regional district. The regional district doesn't get a vote because the regional district doesn't have its own municipality, right? So Stratford is a municipality. The Stratford folks get to vote, right? Some of you everybody in the regional either lives in Stratford, Magnolia, and one of those districts, right? Those are where the votes happen. So the regional district has no say whatsoever in the vote. Right? And kind of that, the regional people just don't vote. You vote as individuals of your municipality. So Stratford votes, Magnolia votes, Summerdale votes, right? The law says that two of those three districts, those three municipalities would have to vote yes for regionalization to move forward. Again, Hynella and Laurel Springs at this point don't get to vote because they're not constituents. So that's what says that's what the law says. So if two of the three constituent districts vote and vote in the affirmative, then the regionalization can move forward. And the notes down there at the bottom, I think I just explained. The law also outlines the process for determining the composition of the new Board of Education. If you have if you vote or move to a full-purpose, all-purpose regional school district, then your individual small boards of education, your individual boards of education for the smaller districts will go away, and you'll have, instead of 5 or whatever boards of ed, you're going to have 1 board of ed. There are 2 boards that kind of sit in different parts of this process, and I think it's the next slide I'll show you when they come and go. But initially, there's an interim board. The interim board takes their seats the interim board is selected from the currently existing school boards. So the regional school board gets to pick some members of the interim board. The Stratford gets to pick the Stratford board gets to pick some members. The Magnolia board gets to pick some members, right? Each regional gets to pick each area gets to pick some members. So how many that would be are listed up there. After that, right, you will then go at the next election, the next November, you will go and vote for members of your regional board of education. So that's where the vote comes in. So that interim board is going to be made up of board members who you've already voted for. They're already sitting on your boards. After that, the regional goes out to an election, and that first November, you will elect board of education members for the new regional board. And you'll see the breakdown there based upon community population. You'll see the breakdown there, the recommended breakdown for how that elected board would look. Right, the representation will be the same on both of those boards. It's just how they're chosen that's a little different. There's no legal issues with, the biggest legal issue here is going to be student segregation, and that's not an issue because these are all the same students. We're not looking to bring another district in or send a district somewhere else. All right, this is the slide I was telling you about. This is the timeline. The far left there, that's today. You have several local boards of education that control your districts, either pre-K to 6 or pre-K to 8, depending on your configuration. And then you have a regional board that makes decisions for 9 through 12. So local boards make the pre-K to 6 or 8 decisions. Regional board makes the 9 through 12 decisions. If this process, if the regionalization or consolidation moves forward and it is accepted and it is positive, the election results are positive, and you decide, the communities decide to move forward, after an affirmative vote, you will have the local boards of education will still be in play, right? We don't vote to regionalize on March, what's today, March 3rd? March 3rd, and we don't regionalize on March 4th, right? So for the rest of the time before we regionalize, we decide to regionalize. If you were going to vote tomorrow, you would not want to regionalize on July 1st of this year. It's too short. You can't get it all done by then, right? So you're going to go probably a year from this July 1st. Those local boards of education that you have right now, we're going to stay in existence because your schools stay in existence until the regionalization happens. There's also an interim regional board that begins to meet and remember, they're made up of your local boards, members from your local boards. They're going to begin to meet because there are decisions that need to be made for the new regional district that we just need a board in place to make those decisions, right? So that's what the interim. So the interim regional board is basically going to be, for a short time, a board overseeing a regional school district that doesn't really yet exist. We're in the planning process, so that's the planning board. After that, after the new board is elected that next November, the local pre-K to 6 or 8 boards go away. The current Sterling Regionals, 9 through 12 board, goes away, and you have one pre-K through 12 Sterling Regional, all-purpose regional board of education that oversees education for students in grades pre-K through 12. Every one of your communities that votes to join in as a constituent district gets a seat, at least one seat on the board. So everybody will have some say. And how those seats are apportioned really depends on the size of your community. All right. This is some of the demographic information. I'm not going to go through all of this, but I want to take just a look at the first lines. Population in Hynella between 2018 and 2022. So if you do the subtraction, it looks like 4 years. It's actually 5 because we count the 2 years on the end. 2018 to 2022, the population of Hynella decreased about 1.3%. Not a huge change. You'll see some of the kind of the breakdown, the racial and demographic breakdowns there. Some communities, members of some communities increases, others go down. The population in Laurel Springs has been pretty stable. They've grown about 5.5%, a little over 5%. The population in Magnolia has been relatively stable. They've grown about a little over 1%. Somerdale has experienced stable population, about 2%. And Stratford, which is the largest of the 5 participating municipalities, with that population, their population has been relatively stable, dropped less than 1%, far less than 1%. Right? Pretty stable populations, that's good. Despite the fact that the overall populations in each of these communities hasn't changed a lot, we do see, and again, if you want to look at this online, if you look at some of the breakdowns of what those communities look like, there has been some pretty significant diversification taking place in your communities. Right? So what the community might have traditionally been looked one way or had certain populations that live there, we see that changing pretty quickly. We do look at housing permit data. One of the questions we'll get to talks about some housing developments, I guess, that are proposed or that are in process. We do look at that housing permit data. We also look at the enrollment. If we brought all of the students together into one pre-K through 12 regional district, we do expect the population of the school district to remain relatively stable over the next 5 years. if we do disaggregate those groups, so we look at our students, right? We look at our students as a full student body, and then we look at our students as which groups are doing better or worse than other groups. Since we see significant diversification in the district, a regional district would allow us to would allow the folks that work here to really pay attention to some of that diversification. Different groups of students have different needs. When we acknowledge that and we begin to really focus on those needs, a regionalization may give you some additional opportunities to do that. The racial, ethnic, socioeconomic composition of the student population is also expected to change, but that's not because we're bringing new students in or sending other students out. That's because your communities are changing. If you do nothing with regionalization, that's still going to happen in your communities, right? You are changing pretty rapidly. So that was the demographic section. Let's move into education and program. These are the guiding questions that we use. Will the students in any newly proposed regional school district have access to higher quality, more equitable educational programs? Will the creation of a larger regional PK-12 district produce additional educational benefits or challenges for students and or staff members when compared to the status quo? That's one of our driving questions. Are there pros? Are there cons? We look at that. Will any newly proposed regional district provide benefits or challenges in serving students from specialized populations? Your students who have some special learning needs, your students who may come to us from a different country, where English is not their first language. That includes students who are gifted, they're a special population. So we take a look at each one of those populations as well. As well as, toward the end, which is a biggie, those eligible for early childhood education. The state of New Jersey has invested tremendously in preschool education. Does any kind of a regionalization provide additional opportunities to expand that preschool population? All right, so we talk about access and the curriculum within our districts. Here's what we find. Students attending Laurel Springs, Magnolia, Summerdale, and Stratford have varying levels of access to pre-K. Right? There are some communities, a growing number of communities in the state, where every single student who is age 3 or 4 has access to free, universal, all-day, full-day pre-K. In this region, each of the districts handle that a little differently. Students attending Laurel Springs, Magnolia, Summerdale, and Stratford schools learn to read using different early literacy programs and a variety of different screeners. For those not in education, a screener is a quick assessment we give to students to find out if they're on grade level, if they've fallen a little bit behind, maybe they're advanced, maybe they're demonstrating that they're advanced in a certain area. Those screeners give us a lot of information to help us tailor instruction to the individual students. In grades 6 to 8, even more variation exists. ELA means English Language Arts. So if you're old school like me, or just old like me, that's your English, right? That's learning to read, learning to write. So ELA is English Language Arts. A wide variety of variation exists in the ELA programs from district to district. So I've got students coming up here to Sterling from a number of the other districts, the districts who send here, Magnolia, Summerdale, all the districts, right? They come and they have all learned to read different ways, using different programs. Doesn't mean they can't read, doesn't mean some read better, right? It just means it's all different. The screeners that they use, all different, right? Or many of them are different. So supplemental programs are, I teach you, some kids get it, right? They just get it the first time. Some students need a little extra support. That's where the supplemental programs come in. The districts that send here to Sterling use different supplemental programs. Students attending the districts use different math programs, and again, different supplementary programs for mathematics, and instructional time varies. Instructional time in this region varies pretty significantly. I don't have it off the top of my head, but it varies significantly, right? Some kids are getting 90 minutes a day, some kids are getting 45 minutes a day. Right? Add that up over the course of a year. We have done studies where at the end of the study, when you add up all those minutes, a student in one district might actually get 2 months of more math instruction than a student in another district. All of that's contained in the study. So we look at that. The lack of common universal screeners and support systems when the students get here to Sterling make comparisons difficult, right? There are a number of screeners that you can choose from. They all have their benefits, and they probably all have their negatives to them. When students get here to the high school, and they have come and they come with data from different screeners, the data from one screener can really not be compared to the data from another screener. They use different measures. So that makes it difficult when they get here to Sterling to really figure out where kids are before they move in, before they get into the building and begin their education. We then do some surveys. Here, we did the survey at the beginning of this current school year at Sterling Regional with this year's 10th graders, asking them very clearly to reflect upon their 9th grade year. Right? So who we survey really depends on the time of year that we get to it, that we do this. Here we did it to this year's 10th graders. We surveyed this year's 10th graders, and we asked them how much reading they did in 7th and 8th grade in any subject area, not just ELA. So everybody probably agrees that in English class you read. Probably read a lot. Some students say we read a lot. Some kids say we read too much, right? But how do we do any of the other subject areas really focus on getting students to read? So we look at those. So not just in English language arts, but across the board, how much reading do we do? What we learned from our survey results, Magnolia students reported that in 7th and 8th grade, they did more reading than the students from the other districts. That was student reports. Most students said they were just as prepared as other students in the 9th grade math classes. So the top ones are English class. Now we're going into math classes. In this case, Stratford students reported feeling better prepared than other students in their 9th grade math class. So all the kids said I felt reasonably prepared, but Stratford was a bit ahead in math in terms of their students, the percentage of their students who said they were reasonably prepared. Furthering the investigation, right? Under a unified district, the Board of Education would need to work with district and building level administrators to determine staffing needs at each grade level, at the elementary level, and within each subject area at the secondary level. This review has the potential over time to increase staffing efficiencies. Second grade, you are never not going to offer second grade, right? But there are some districts that say, we typically have 60 students come through every grade level. So I'm going to have 3 sections, 20 kids in each. All of a sudden, you get a grade level that, for whatever reason, the population drops a little bit. Maybe I only have 42 kids this year. In some districts, far too many districts, we have folks who say, well, we have 3 teachers, so we got to split them up among 3. You don't have to split them up among 3 classrooms. There's 42 kids. I can put 21 in 2 classrooms. That's a good education, right? And then I can use that other teacher to offer some of these supplementary services. Maybe somebody retires. I don't replace them because I have this teacher here. I get an extra teacher. There's lots of things that you will find as you pull these pieces together. You have the potential to find efficiencies. I can speak again firsthand. We did this, right? We found efficiencies. I had a group of students. I had a school, one of my schools had 2 sections of every grade level. We had a first grade class that had 18 students in it moving to second grade, and the principal of the building, because that's what principals do, I was one of them, right, said, I'm going to protect those people. Guess what? They wanted to have 2 sections of 9 kids each. I don't need that, right? 18 kids in that second grade class are fine. I can use that teacher someplace else where he or she can better use their skills. So you will find those things happen. So the formation of a unified school district can certainly lead to those kinds of efficiencies as well. You can eliminate the redundant supervisory services across the district. Even if you were to regionalize every single district joined the regional and as a constituent district as it exists now, the district itself will be about, I think the number we came up with was 2,800 students. That's not an incredibly large school district, right? So there are certain levels of administration that you need, certainly, but there will also be opportunities to streamline that. You don't necessarily need to have 2 or 3 special ed directors. You don't need 2 or 3 maintenance directors, facilities director, like all those types of things, right? You don't need 2 or 3, 4, 5 business administrators. You don't need that because you're one district now. So currently you have those opportunities to share. Technology is a big one. Transportation is very costly now. You can look at ways to become streamlined there and be more efficient there. Currently, there are administrative tasks that I promise you are replicated in all 5 school districts, right? They're done. I'm doing this today. Somebody across the street's doing this. Down the road, they're doing this. That doesn't need to be. If you have 5 districts, you have to do it 5 times. If you have 1 district, you do it 1 time, right? You're done. So these are also, in terms of instructional support, areas that you can look for efficiencies down the road. In terms of performance, what's really interesting about your performance, and I did this analysis, is that there is no, I can't stand here right now and say the students coming from X do better than everybody else. They might do better than everybody else this year, but when I look at next year, or when I look at last year's data, it doesn't show that, right? So your data is kind of all over the place. The differences in overall instructional time at the elementary level provide an opportunity to really provide more similar experiences to students as they work their way through K to 12. The alignment across the districts or in one all-purpose regional would provide a more even playing field, right? I don't have students coming in having, 90 minutes of math a day, sitting next to a student who, for the last 3 years, only had 45 minutes of math a day. The remaining disparities among elementary assessment score, there remain disparities among elementary assessment scores in both ELA and math at various grade levels. There is no pattern there that says, just going to pick a name, that says Stratford does better every time. That doesn't exist. Stratford will do better sometimes, but then Magnolia sneaks in and does better a couple of years, and then Somerdale sneaks in and does better a year, right? So those disparities do exist. Better curriculum coordination, more aligned curriculum can begin, that is possible through regionalization, can begin to really address some of those issues, Data indicates the persistence of achievement gaps. I don't know that there's many school districts in America that don't show this, but there are achievement gaps that exist between your white students and students of color, as well as along socioeconomic status, gender, and ability. Okay, MSGP means the median student growth percentile. Here's what a student growth percentile is. This year, I take an assessment and I get a score. Everybody who scored the same as I did on that assessment this year becomes part of my cohort. Next year, all of us take that assessment again. Not surprisingly, some of us do a little better than others, right? So a student growth percentile says, based upon this cohort that I formed last year, how did I do compared to those students? So it really doesn't have anything to do with did I pass or not pass. It means on average, the students that were in my cohort last year grew 50 points and I grew 80 points, right? So I outgrew them, right? I'm being real simplistic here, but I outgrew them. Or my group of students grew 50, or my group on average grew 50 points, I only grew 20, right? That's a problem. Here, your MSGPs, those numbers indicate that students are demonstrating typical growth in ELA and math, across all of the districts. You're all in that typical growth range. Not everybody's exact, but you're all in what we consider the typical growth range. Students from Magnolia, in this case, students from Magnolia are growing at a slightly greater ELA rate than those in the other districts. And here at Sterling, both the 4 and 5-year Sterling graduation rates. So graduation rates are measured a couple different ways. 4-year, I was here for 4 years. I got out right when I was supposed to. And then we call this next measure a measure of persistence. Students who aren't successful in 4 years, they stay for an extra year. Many students after that 4th year, if they don't make it, they just disappear. They drop out, right? Here at Sterling, they actually hang out. They hang around. They stay until they graduate. So your 4 and 5-year graduation rates rose consistently throughout the period we examined over the last several years. That's a good thing. All right, special populations. This is probably one of the areas that you could potentially see the most amount of savings. Because the districts that feed into Sterling Regional are relatively small, you have a limited number of students in each district who have very specific learning needs, right? Very specific classifications for students with that require special education services. If I have one autistic student with autism in my school, I can open a program for that student. It'll be expensive, it's going to be costly, or I can send that student out of district to a program that already exists. If you serve as a regional and if every one of the pre-K to 6 or 8 districts has one student that's in that situation, now you just went from my district has one student, what do I do with that student, how do I best serve them, to now the regional has 5 students or 6 students or 7. 5, 6, 7 students are worth opening a program for, right? I will do that. You're going to save a boatload of money because each one of those students between tuition and transportation is probably going to cost the taxpayers, your district, probably near $100,000, and that might be conservative for some kids. If I open a program hire a teacher, an aide, pay them benefits, I'm not spending $500,000 to educate those 5 kids. You're not going to get to $500,000 with that. Right? So that's where you can definitely, if programmed properly, you can definitely see some savings there. You can experience some savings there. You also have an opportunity to develop a teacher with a very specialized, in my school district, we had programs for students with autism pre-K through 12. The teachers who taught those programs, that is all they wanted to do. They were specialized, they loved their jobs, that is all they wanted to do. Right? That's what you can get. When you don't have that many students, it's hard to do that. You just don't have that many kids you're servicing. ML is multilingual. This population that used to be called English language learners. Multilingual students, each of the districts in this region have very small ML populations or ELL populations. It makes it really hard to program. I might only have 2 or 3 students in my school. I still have to program for them. I have to provide them with services. I need 1 teacher to do that, to provide their services. If each of the schools has 2 or 3 kids, across 5 different schools, I can have 15 students. I still need 1 teacher. So rather than 1 ELL teacher in each school, perhaps part-time, but still, there's a teacher. Have you tried to find a part-time teacher lately? Especially that kind of teacher? Not going to happen, right? Really hard to find that. If I can hire somebody full-time, I can serve them across the region, all the students across the region with that single person, you're in much better shape, and you will provide a much more a robust program for those students. Special populations, high quality intervention programs are used to meet the needs of students. Okay, so across all of the districts, there is a process, there is a system that we use in education called a multi-tiered system of supports in New Jersey. We do what New Jersey does best. We take the M off and we change it to NJ, so it's the New Jersey tiered system of supports. It is the same thing. New Jersey just has to put its label on it. All districts in the study use some form of an MTSS, right? So an MTSS says if you have students in school or you've been part of meetings, Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 interventions, those are the levels of interventions. Tier 1 interventions, every student gets. It's called excellent instruction in every classroom. Even with excellent instruction in every classroom, not every student's going to learn at the same pace. So I'm going to get this, maybe 15%, 20% of students who just need some support, they move into Tier 2. So they might get they definitely get the regular instruction, then they get some additional support. Even with that additional support, I still have 1 or 2 kids who just aren't getting it. They get Tier 3 services, right? So it's just that we don't provide Tier 3 to everybody. We provide the services to the kids who need them. So that's what MTSS means in a nutshell. Every district in this region has an MTSS system. Some are a little more robust than others. But everybody uses different intervention systems, uses different programs. Everybody uses something different to run this. So when those students leave 8th grade and they come here, you got data all over the place. It's really hard to figure out where the students are. So Sterling will figure it out. Like, they'll get there, but it's not going to happen before the kids get here, and it's not going to happen on day 1. So unifying a protocol, right, series of our guidance around how we identify and serve those students would certainly benefit the kids in those populations. All right, so we know there's some staffing efficiencies. So I mentioned this earlier, but under a unified school district, the study assumes that all existing schools will remain open and most school level populations will remain as they are. I say most because if we have, let's say we have a population in each school, and I don't know that this is the case in any of the schools here, but I'm going to make this up. If we have a population of students who are hearing impaired in this region, okay? If we have a population of students who are hearing impaired in this region, we may open a program in one school, one classroom in one school for those students, and I might have to take the students from this school and this school and this school and take them to that school. So I can't guarantee you that those individual students are going to be able to stay in their school unless their parent wants them to, because the best services might be available over here. Right now, if I have one student who's a hearing impaired, and I can't service them in my school, I am sending them out of district. And that's going to cost a fortune. Right? If I can just take them across town, they're getting sent anyway. I can send them over there, or I can send them right over here and give them the same level of service. So under a unified school district, you can do those things, but in general, we are not looking at moving kids from Stratford into a Magnolia school or vice versa. That did not come up anywhere. Child study team members right now are kind of scattered throughout the districts. There's lots that serve many different roles. They can be assigned certainly at the school level, which is pretty common and pretty popular, or they can be shared across the district. If I'm a child study team member, let's say a school psychologist that has a specialty, and my specialty, I have students in 3 or 4 different schools, I can be shared across those schools, right? If I right now have a specialty and I work in Magnolia, the chances that I'm just going to pick up in the middle of the day and go over to Stratford to help out are probably pretty slim, right? I have my own caseload I'm working with. This way we can really assign the adults to work with the students who are best prepared to work with that population. And again, clerical and support staff, I talked about on earlier slides. There are just reports and budgets and plans and things that are just replicated district to district. Certainly maybe some room there. As folks retire, as folks leave the district, we can look at job responsibilities and begin to shuffle. The district can begin to shuffle some of those around and perhaps realize some saving in clerical and support staff. You will hear me, and I'll say this now and I'll probably repeat it at the end. I keep saying words like, and we can, or perhaps, right? That's because it's not up to us. If your Board of Education, however this lands, says, no, we want to keep all of these people, that's up to them, right? It just gives you an opportunity to look at things through a different lens. All right, let me move into finance. This is not my area. I'm going to do the best I can. State aid. I talked a little bit earlier about our kind of state aid guru who has a model that projects state aid. The state aid funding formula this year changed a bit than it has been in the past, right? So we were under a process for the last 5 or 6 years that we in education called S2. S2 is a piece of legislation that basically says we have some school districts in the state that receive more money than they should. We have some that don't get as much money as they should. We're going to begin taking from there and giving to here, right? And that has happened and rolled out over the last 5 or 6 years. This year, school districts are notified that not that student count and population doesn't matter. There are school districts in the state that at their peak had 14 or 15,000 kids, and just because kids grow up, parents get older, they stop having kids, right? That 14 to 15 kids from 10 years ago or 20 years ago is now down to 7,000 kids. That's how we're districts in the state that have cut their student population in half. They have not released one teacher. So they have the same number of teachers today that they did to teach twice as many kids 10 years ago. Like that exists in New Jersey today. S2 was the best attempt at the state level to say, we can't keep funding all of these, and I say teachers, it could be any staff member, right? We can't keep funding all these students that no longer exist in that school district because over here I have a school district that's bursting at the seams and they can't get any more money because it's all going over there, right? Where the kids aren't anymore. Those kids moved over here. We're still paying that old district for them. Right? So that's what that law really tried to do. This year there was a little wrinkle thrown into that. I don't think we really followed the SFRA, is the School Funding Reform Act. This is education. If we do anything well, we create little acronyms. SFRA is the School Funding Reform Act. That has been very consistent over the last several years since the adoption of S2, the S2 legislation. This year there was a little bit of a twist to that. Nonetheless, we are still under the guise of the school funding. That is the law in New Jersey in terms of school funding. Tax apportionment. The current law provides, I mentioned this earlier, the current law provides 3 apportionment methods. Equalized valuation, how much are all the properties in your community worth? More wealth in your community, more wealth in terms of property, means you pay more, right? Then there's student enrollment, which means we don't care about the wealth in your community. It's just about how many kids are coming from that community. And then there's this combination, and you'll see in a minute, that's what we used in the study. We used a nice mix of the two to really come up with an equation or a formula that would allow each of the communities to save some money. So the folks who work in our finance and operations team, they look at a bunch of models, a whole lot of models. We know all the equalized valuations from your communities. We know years and years worth of school budgets. We project all of this out. And we send all this money, we use all this data to produce the charts you're going to see on the next several pages. Shared services, send receive tuitions, long-term debt, operating expenses, facility utilization. We look at all those things. Okay? So we look at each one of those elements. Collective bargaining agreements, this is a big one. What we do with collective bargaining agreements is we look at what are the differences in the agreements that exist today. So we looked at Sterling, and we looked at all of the pre-K to 6-8 districts and their collective bargaining agreements. Because they are bargained by different associations, different units within the NJEA, they have some differences between each one of them. So a review of those collective bargaining agreements really is just, we do this just to provide a comparison. District A uses Aetna as their health insurance carrier. District B uses Horizon. District C uses somebody else, right? Or somebody's part of the state health benefits program, somebody isn't. So we look at all those things. The CBAs have similar, the CBA is your collective bargaining agreement. The CBAs have similar expiration dates. 4 of the 5 districts expire in June of 2027. There are some differences in negotiations, grievance procedures. Those usually aren't the hard things to work out. Right, that's kind of the part of the contract that sits at the very front of a collective bargaining agreement that most people don't read. That's out there. The length of the school day and the school year, as well as the teacher preparation time, are pretty similar. They're not exact, but they're pretty similar across districts. That's a good thing if this were to move forward. Salary guide shows some divergence that would require alignment. This is not going to sugarcoat this. That's going to be your hardest part, right? How do we take all these individual contracts and get everybody onto one guide eventually, right? Does not have to happen right away. There's a process that can be followed. That doesn't happen right away. But ultimately, as you begin to operate, if you should begin to operate as one district, everybody's going to have to eventually be on the same contract. Insurance coverages tend to be divergent between districts. That will change in time because right now, if you are a New Jersey education employee in a school in New Jersey, and you either start your career, you change districts, I move from here to there, right? I have to go into a health benefit plan that is mandated by the state, right? So if you work in a school right now and you leave your job this year and you go to a district down the street, you will not have a choice as to what health insurance you pick. If you are in your final year of your career and you're going to retire and go into the retirement system, you will not have a choice as to what health insurance you have, right? You get what they give you, right? It's a good plan, but that's what you get. So that's going to change, but right now there is some divergence, there is some differences between the coverages for the people who've been here for a while. Significant effort will need to be focused on salary and insurance issues. We know that. That is part of the reason that the state offers those implementation grants, because you're going to really have to do some work there. People are going to have to be brought in, and the state of New Jersey has offered implementation grants to cover those costs because they recognize that's going to be a challenge. Regionalization could be expected to generate savings on things like attorney fees, typically in negotiations, not everybody. Typically when you're doing negotiations, you have your board attorney, your board solicitor present. If you're only negotiating one contract, you only need one solicitor. I don't need to do that 5 times. So things like attorney fees, consolidated contract negotiations. All right, so there's some potential savings. All right, here's some cost savings that we found as a result of potential regionalizations, and you're going to see 2 different scenarios, right? Scenario 1, everybody becomes a constituent district. Scenario 2, only the 3 constituent districts today, Magnolia, Summerdale, Stratford, always got to miss one, Magnolia, Summerdale, Stratford, remain constituent districts, and everybody else, the other 2 just stay, Hynella and Laurel Springs stay send receive. So you're going to see 2 different things here. And that's not accidental. Both regionalization scenarios project financial benefits through cost savings. The all potential constituent districts, which means everybody joins the region. Scenario estimates gross cost savings of about $1.5 million annually. It's an estimate. That's what we come up with. While the constituent-only scenario, which means Hynella and Laurel Springs don't join the region, don't choose to join the region, if we just did that, you would see about 1.3 million in cost savings. You could see that. The majority of these savings come from the consolidation of administrative personnel. So you'll see some of that breakdown there, right? $361,825 for the consolidation of superintendents, from 4 full-time positions and 1 part-time position to a single superintendent that oversees the regional district, and a new assistant superintendent if the board decides to go there, right? You may say we don't need that. The board may say we don't need that position. That's fine. We added it in there. If that does not exist, that savings number goes up. $280,000 or so for consolidation of school business administrators, and varying amounts for directors of special education, directors of technology, facility supervisors and directors. You have multiple of those folks that exist across the region. There would be an increase of about $111,000 for an additional principal to serve Summerdale. Summerdale has a principal superintendent combined. If there's no need for the superintendent title there, right, because you now have a superintendent over the region, you still need a principal in that building. So that's what that number's for. Non-personnel savings are also pretty significant at about $280,000. So these are all potential savings. When a regional board of if a regional board of education were to be seated, right, these savings are wonderful, but I might say as a board member, you know what? We need to launch a new program to do something, right? Our community wants us to have this program, right? So while that money is available and should be, something close to that should be freed up, it does not mean that the Board of Education has to give it back to the taxpayers. It means it's money. I, as a board member, can say, yeah, I want to give it back to all the taxpayers, or I can say we have so many needs, we can better use this money, right? Or I can do something in the middle, give half back, use half of it. That's not up to us. That would be up to the Board of Education that you elect. Miscellaneous items under finance and operations, transportation. The proposed regionalization would likely result in minimal changes to transportation. You're going to be transporting all the same students to pretty much all the same places. That part's not going to change. Food service, food service is sort of all over the place. You could certainly streamline that by going with one food service provider, likely providing as good or better services to every school within the region. Facilities, Sterling High School is fully utilized. There's really no room here for significant program expansion, which means you build a building and you have students who are filling the building. And you have programs that are meeting the needs of those students. There is room in a few of the elementary schools to consider some program expansion over the next several years. An all-purpose grade K-12 regional school district would have greater flexibility to assign students in grade levels as needed to be more effectively and efficiently use available classroom spaces. That means some school districts get to the point, you're not here yet, it's not going to happen immediately, but down the road there's a little population explosion. You can't serve all of your pre-K to 5 students in a building, so you might have to move 5th grade to the middle school, right, or something like that. And that happens sometimes. That's going to be the local decision. That's not going to be up to us. It's not going to be up to anybody. If this were to happen, it's not going to be up to anybody like that sits on a board today. It's going to be up to that Board of Education how to best seat those kids. That is nothing different than what happens all over the state every year. All right. This is the projected state aid from 2026 to 2029. You will see that up here. These are just some numbers in terms of what the individual districts receive in state aid. If you look at 25-26, you're probably going to see a little bit of a change as to the actual number that districts were just notified about last week, simply because, as I said, there was that little tweak to the formula this year that nobody can project. They don't tell us this ahead of time, right? But we will go back into our models and we will kind of rework those numbers based upon that tweak. But based upon the information we had when doing the study, this is your state aid over the course of the next several years. That's based upon your student population, the wealth of your community, the income of your community members. That's how they calculate that. State aid in a regional scenario will be calculated based upon the School Funding Reform Act funding formula. So you'll see if you were today a pre-K through 12 regional district, this is likely very close to what your state aid would look like. All right, so in this year, your equalization aid, at the top there is your largest kind of category of state aid, but you'll see down there maybe 4 rows up from the bottom, you're going to see your total state aid. You'll see that total state aid grow a bit each year, moving from 26 through 29. So that's your projected state aid. If you were to just do the constituent districts, so these numbers, not that you're memorizing these, but these numbers are everybody joins the region. These numbers are only the current 3 constituent districts stay in the region. That's what your state aid would look like. So in these numbers, the difference between this chart and the last chart is that Hynella and Laurel Springs are removed from these numbers. Does not mean nobody loves Hynella or Laurel Springs, just the legal setup of the districts. Okay. So I talked a little bit about that mix between enrollment and equalized value. If you decide to move ahead, and it is successful the vote is successful to move ahead, the model that we use favored a ratio of 58% of the model based upon the equalized valuation, how much the properties in your community are worth, and 42% based on enrollment. And you'll see on the next slide or two what that results in terms of tax savings, projected tax savings. So this apportionment method, the 58-42 split, can potentially generate tax savings for all of the communities, each one of the communities, with a projected average net annual savings across the region of about $1.33 million. Current constituents only, which means Hynella and Laurel Springs, are removed from that equation. We switch the model to a 54-46, 54% equalized value, 46% based on enrollment. And there you can look at somewhere in the neighborhood of a $1.11 million tax savings, or $1.11 million savings. All right. All right, here's where everybody's eyes go crossed. Do not expect, you can look at this, you can download this, you can stare at it all day tomorrow if you want to. I'm going to just go over some of these numbers with you so you'll see. If you can't see because you're too far away, over on the far left, the districts are listed in those kind of white lines that go through the chart. So it's Stratford at the top, Summerdale underneath, Magnolia beneath that, Laurel Springs, and then Hynella. So you will see 2026, if a regionalization were to happen, in 2026, it's not going to happen, but if that were to happen, you would be looking in Stratford at a savings in taxes of about $193 a house, an average house. In Summerdale, about $79 an average house. In Magnolia, about $241 an average house. Laurel Springs, about $167 an average house. And Hynella, as the non-operating send-receive district, this has nothing to do with Hynella, this happens every single time, saves $327, right? That is just how the formula works out. If that upsets you, don't read to the right. Because you'll see, let's project out to 2029. Average house in Stratford will drop about $204. Average house and this is based upon versus the status quo, right? So if we just leave things as they are versus regionalizing. If you regionalize rather than leave things where they are, average Stratford house about $204, down about, in Summerdale about $133 less, Magnolia about $172 less, Laurel Springs about $39 less, sorry Laurel Springs, and I'm not going to say the Hynella number out loud. The Hynella number is about $669. We have some Hynella fans in the house. All right. All right. So this chart, you'll see all 5 communities listed, right? Because this is everybody joins the region. The next chart is only 3 communities because these are the current existing regional or constituent districts. So if this scenario were to happen, next year, Stratford house, average house in Stratford save about $154. Summerdale about $117. Magnolia about $246. Go all the way out to 2029. Now, obviously, the further you get out, the less reliable the numbers. But as we project it, 2029, Stratford will save about $154, $55. Summerdale about $172 or $3, and Magnolia about $165. All right, that's the numbers. Summary, law and governance. There are no adverse effects, factors that indicate regionalization would be problematic. The number one issue we look at there is additional enhanced segregation. That does not happen here. The demography, for the foreseeable future, the school buildings are sufficient to accommodate Hynella and Laurel Springs into the region. Right? They're already going to school in these buildings, so that shouldn't be a surprise. They already come to school here. Education and program in subjects that range from math to music. There are absolute differences between the district's curriculum, the resources they use to support those programs, not only in their kind of core academic programs, but also in some of those special area programs. Those differences absolutely exist. Human resources, While shared services will offer financial benefits, it's important to note that sharing across districts can take a toll on the human, right? So shared services can take its toll on humans. The people who are hired into those positions that are shared among multiple districts with multiple bosses can absolutely take their toll on the humans that do that. And finance and operations, we do project that there are long-term cost savings that can be realized through the elimination of redundancies, through efficiencies that are achieved. I always look at this and say there are two levels of efficiencies. Number one are the things we can take right off the top. I can look and I can say, you have a person doing this job in this district, and this district. We don't need 3 people doing that job if we're one district, right? That's the easy part. The probably more kind of nuanced part is, I'm the superintendent in your district and I walk around and I see we have somebody who's retiring this year. That person's, moving on to their retirement. Let me look at who's left and see if we can split up jobs a little different, and maybe I don't have to replace that person. Maybe instead of a full-time person, I get a part-time person, right? So it's those kind of efficiencies that happen over time. Here are some of the questions we received. Interested in knowing how our taxes will be impacted. This was the question, I believe, Stratford, and this is noted in the full study. Stratford's in the process of planning to build or is building numerous townhouses that will likely result in more children in school. How will this impact us in Somerdale? So this is a Somerdale taxpayer who says, wait, Stratford's building all these houses. My taxes are going to go up now? Not necessarily so, because as Stratford builds those houses, that's why we have that apportionment formula built in there, right? So as Stratford builds all those houses, I don't know how many there are, but if Stratford builds additional houses, the additional students from the new development will impact ratables and enrollment, which the houses will impact ratables. The houses will also impact enrollment, and in a blended apportionment model, more of the costs would shift to Stratford, but more of the costs are going to shift to Stratford and be spread over more Stratford residents. So it doesn't necessarily impact the individual homeowner, because you're going to spread those over the new houses that are being built. Those houses don't exist right now. They will eventually pay taxes. How would each town or borough be represented in the regional school board? You'll see that down at the bottom there. So in the all scenario where everybody joins the regional, Stratford would get 3 representatives, Somerdale 2, Magnolia 2, Laurel Springs and Hynella each get 1, everybody represented. If only the current constituents, Stratford, Somerdale, and Magnolia, were voted to stay to join the full-purpose regional, all-purpose regional, Stratford would get 4 seats, Somerdale would get 3, Magnolia would get 2. That's, again, based on your community populations. Has there any been research on the effects that on how this may impact home prices and property value? If you form a pre-K through 12 school district that brings about, this is a big if, right? That actually results in the projected improvements in education that we see when we look at and do the study. Kids, their education as they go up through the system are better aligned. You're better serving your students with special needs. You're better serving your students with your gifted students. You can, at some point, increase preschool so that people, if I told you that each one of your communities had free full-day preschool, do you think more people with young kids would move in? Or I can pay $10,000, whatever I pay now, right, to send my kids to a private school, or I can do it here for free, right? The state-run, or not state-run, just locally operated, but state kind of oversight preschools are pretty rigorous preschools. They're good products, right? So if you're the number one driver in any community in terms of your property value is going to be how good your schools are, right? I don't care how many Walmarts you build, I don't care how many restaurants you put in town, your schools are going to drive what people think of your community. So if the schools get better, the community gets better. Then there are a couple comments, I just threw them on here because I didn't want to leave anybody out. But these were the questions we received earlier prior to tonight. There was one additional question that came in over the weekend, and I covered that in the previous slide. That question was, when do the different boards of education, responsibility of the different boards of education kind of take over and drop off? That was the slide that kind of showed that line, right? Right now you have your local boards that will then turn into eventually a regional board of education. So some time ago now, I guess it's been about a year and a half ago? July 1st. So up in the northern part of the state, there's a school district called the Henry Hudson Regional. The superintendent there, her name is Tara Beams. She was the first one under this new legislation, the new law that came out several years ago, that actually was successful at getting a school regionalization passed. It's really important to realize that this is not the end of this, right? This is actually the beginning of the discussion on this, right? This is not, hey, Rowan came in and said we could save money, we're going to do this. Like, that's not how this works. This is the beginning of your discussion. Any type of study like this, there are going to be pros and cons. You have to make up your mind about whether the pros outweigh the cons. We've shown you what we believe to be kind of the most neutral representation of what we believe can benefit the region, as well as some of the areas that might provide some challenges. But regionalization doesn't start with your feasibility study. It doesn't start with asking the commissioner if you can do this. It has to come from within the school district and the school community, because you know your district's best. So at this point, we will turn it over to you and say, between your boards of education, your administrators in each of your districts, you really need to have a conversation about this to see if this is what's right for this Sterling region. All right? And I'm going to turn it over to the president of the Sterling board, who will kind of give us some closing remarks.
Thank you. So that thank you goes to all of you. It goes to Scott, Brian, Mark, and the Rowan University team who put their time and effort to put this together for you today. But it also goes out to all of you sitting in the audience today. Your participation, whether you submitted questions earlier or if you're going to use the QR code to submit questions after we're done today, really will help us figure out how we go forward here as a community. Our hope tonight was that you all learned something new. Maybe you found a piece of information that you thought went one way and you goes another way now that you've seen it up there, or you just kind of have asserted any other assumptions that you had and you've kind of seen how they work through tonight. So I want to thank all of you again. Thank you for sitting here tonight. Thank you for submitting your questions, and thank you for working with Matt Sheehan as you guys went through the community advocacy group. That group's been around for a while, and I know that they've been doing a lot of work with that. And so in the closing remarks today, know that the QR code is going to be available till Monday. Put your questions in. We will get those answers back to you in due time. And again, thank you all for coming tonight, and I hope you have a safe trip home and enjoy the rest of your evening. I'm sorry. Oh, the community group is, Rowan group is going to stay if anybody wants to talk. There you go. It's out the door too.